My grandparents were born in Russia, and they were farmers. In 1921, there was a great famine. Many people died of starvation. Farmers had it a little bit better than most other people because they had grain, and not supposed to use their grain for eating, they were supposed to use their grain for seed, but during a famine, they used their grain for eating. What happened then is people who were not farmers would come to the door and beg for food. There was one man, and he would save his grain for only his wife and children, and he never gave out any food to anybody that came by asking for food. After the famine was over, this man discovered that he had grain left over. And years later, he was racked with guilt that he had not helped his neighbors when they were hungry. And he had kept all the food to himself and his family. This culminated years later when he committed suicide by starvation. And he did that surrounded by food. There was no famine at that time, but he just chose not to eat. He chose to die in the same manner of which he had seen his other neighbors in Russia die. And this was a tragedy. Now, my grandparents at that time had a completely different attitude about beggars. My grandmother, she got up at 2, 3 in the morning and baked buns every single morning. Then around breakfast time, there was a lineup of people at her kitchen door, and there were people asking for food. And so she would hand out one bun to each person at the door, and children also got a cup of milk, and pregnant women got a cup of milk. And some might think, well, she had lots of grain, it wasn't really that much of a sacrifice except for time and energy, but other than that, they would be wrong. My Uncle John, her firstborn son, was born around that time, and he was born with rickets. Rickets is a disease of malnutrition. So my grandmother was malnourished while pregnant, and her son, her baby boy, had rickets. The doctor said he would never walk. She refused to accept the doctor's prognosis and massaged the baby's legs and arms every day, believing. And sure enough, my Uncle John did learn to walk, but he was delayed. He learned to walk about a year after most babies learn to walk. But he did learn to walk. He grew up, he got married, he had his own farm, he had children, grandchildren, and lived to a ripe old age. Sacrificial giving happens in the context of community. You could close yourself off to everybody else and their needs like the other farmer did, and never give anything and just keep it all to yourself. But that's not the way to life. My grandparents were never rich, but they were full of life. And I will always remember them, and they will always be an inspiration to me. I did write about my grandparents' life in this book called Seeds for Spring. And it's got a lot of twists and turns in it. Their life was such an inspiration to me that I felt like I needed to put it down on paper for anybody else who might be interested in reading it.